Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Lab, the NFL edition, where we go over some of the notable injury news that we just received on Sunday morning. We take some user questions and then we talk about projected changes, stuff like that. As always, I'm joined by Matthew Friedman and Ian Hartitz. Guys, all right, let's dive right into it because we have quite a few things to go over. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll start with a couple of the surprising injury statuses that we got. Some of them not having to do with injuries, more so than disciplinary things. But Ian, let's start with the Jacksonville Jaguars. We got word that Leonard Fournette violated some team violations, something to do with a team picture. Not really sure, not really important. Point is that Chris Ivory is seemingly going to get the start. What are your thoughts on the Bengals matchup, and how does Fournette's injury shake up the slate? I mean, we're already sort of down a couple of the top-end running backs, even though we did get Zeke in here at the end of the week.
Yeah, definitely huge. Like you said, not quite sure the specifics of why Fournette's not up, but yeah, Jacksonville will be starting Chris Ivory. We saw this happen actually right before their bye week against the Colts, and Ivory worked as that lead back. He had 17 carries, whereas Yeldon only had 9 and 2 receptions. I think the big thing to note, even though Bortles actually had a pretty good game against that Colts defense, and we all know how bad that secondary is, this is still an offense that, is run first, wants to keep the game out of Bortles' hands as much as possible. So we're expecting while neither Ivory or Yeldon will have that massive role that Fournette, that we used to Fournette having, Bo should still be very involved on a down-to-down basis.
Yeah, Freeman, what are your thoughts on the matchup for Ivory? Obviously, at 4-4, has to be in the discussion now for guys that you want to look at, even in a low total game. Obviously, 38 is where the total is right now. Not great, but 4-4 is a price worth talking about at least. What are your thoughts here? We're losing some audio on Friedman. Cannot hear Friedman. All right, let's go to another matchup while Friedman figures out his mic, and then
the mic is on.
There you go. All right, let's get your thoughts on Ivory.
Okay, it's a great spot for him just because of the salary. They're at home, they're favored. As Ian mentioned, we did see Yeldon get touches last game, but a lot of that came, I don't want to say in garbage time, but towards the second half when they had the lead. So Ivory, he had more touches, he had more snaps. I think he's going to be the guy. And as you mentioned, with that salary, it's hard, I think, not to be tempted to put him in, especially this with the savings that he could provide.
Yeldon ended up being the GPP play, 25 DraftKings points last time. Seemed a little flukish with just the long runs. Are you guys have any interest in him in, GPP? I guess like a million maker, it's worth thinking about just because you have to get these guys really low owned. But it seems like a recency bias spot that Yeldon's actually not getting quite as much work as maybe his final DK points indicate.
Yeah, that's possible. I think I would still opt for Ivory, especially in cash games, Ivory over Yeldon. Yeldon is interesting, but Ivory can still get work as a receiving guy. So I think I'm still with Ivory over Yeldon.
Okay. Let's move to a team that has a couple notable things that we need to hit on here. The Philadelphia Eagles. We got word late last night that Zach Ertz was going to play, but then apparently didn't look or feel great warming up, so they decided to hold him out. So Zach Ertz is out. And then we also have this Jay Ajayi trade. And I think we got a little bit of news on what we might expect from him as far as a workload. Ian, what are your thoughts on these two guys?
Yeah, so we'll start with Ertz being out. Basically, wasn't able to get going in pre-games as well as they thought he was able to. So Eagles are going to move forward with Trey Burton and Brent Selleck at tight end. Selleck's really been more of a blocking tight end for them, and he's been in the league for about 10 years now. So Burton definitely the guy with a little bit of upside. He's actually had 3 games without Ertz, and he's averaged a 3.39 and a 0.3 line. So definitely had some production as that guy. And with the Broncos cornerbacks. Burton's not quite Ertz good, but definitely a player capable of kind of exploiting that D. With Ajayi, it's been the same word all week, really. The Eagles are not going to rush him into this offense and immediately feed him 20 touches like we're used to seeing in Miami. The Eagles are playing as the best team in the NFL. They have their rotation going with Blunt, Wendell Smallwood, Corey Clement. They're going to have 5 running backs active today. So, maybe Ajayi can take over that backfield sooner rather than later. But for today, they just have a small package of plays for him, and they're going to go from there.
Yeah, Ajayi obviously not in the DK main slate just because of the timing of the trade when they release salaries. And also just wanted to note quickly, if you watch the Flex podcast and seemingly have not kept up with any of the news, Ezekiel Elliott is in, Deshaun Watson is out. So just wanted to get those ahead of – obviously, we did not mention those injuries at the top of the show, assuming people knew that. But just in case, if you're playing Deshaun Watson – do not. Freeman, what are your thoughts on the Eagles situation here? Obviously, brutal matchup against the Broncos, who, if they have one weakness, it's probably in the middle of the field against tight ends. So Ertz being out, not great for DFS players, probably not good for the offense either.
Yeah, I don't know. This might end up being something that's pretty nice for DFS players because Ertz was priced as the most expensive guy at his position, and Burton is an athletic guy. They've wanted to get him more touches. It's just you can't really do that when Ertz is like an all-pro guy ahead of him. But he still has a really a nice matchup going against strong safety Darian Stewart and then safety linebacker Will Parks. Those guys have allowed a combined 72.1% of the passes targeted at them to be completed. So there's a lot to like about this matchup, especially because Trey Burton, and I'm busting out a phrase from last season, is stone minimum on both sides. So there, I don't know. This is actually a really interesting development coming in late that could shake up a lot of lineups.
What is our confidence in his workload though? Like the price is great. Obviously, if he fit into Ertz's role, that would be great. But we're not expecting him to get double-digit targets like Ertz is. But is it enough where he's viable in cash games?
I think so. I mean, I hate to say that, but I think he's viable because he is so cheap. Because he's gotten work before when Ertz has been out because of the matchup. And then also, I mean, just even this season, even though he's played fewer snaps than Selleck because he's not really in the Selleck role, he's still gotten more targets than Selleck. He's still gotten more red zone targets than Selleck. So I think he's the guy. I mean, I think if he gets 5 or 6 targets and he gets 3 or 4 receptions and 40 yards, 30 yards, something like that. I mean, I think he gives you enough salary savings to be able to go really expensive at other positions.
Cool. All right, let's hit on some of the smaller injury news. We'll just run through these. We have 3 or 4 more things to hit on. Then we'll get into some user questions here. So throw those into the chat if you want us to answer some of your questions. Let's go over to the Redskins. We're getting reports, Ian, that Rob Kelly is going to be limited. So what are your thoughts on this offense? I mean, obviously not great with Jordan Reed out. Again, there are multiple guys along the offensive line that are out. Going against the Seattle defense in Seattle, this just seems like a really, really tough spot for Washington this week. What are your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, we got a whole lot going on here. Rob Kelly is looking like he'll play, but could have a limited workload, like you said. Redskins left tackle, Trent Williams, their left guard, their center are all looking like they're going to be out. And Brandon Scherf, their right guard, is questionable. So tons of problems along the offensive line. And then Jordan Reed, their tight end's already ruled out with a hamstring injury, and backup tight end Niles Paul with a concussion, all setting up real well for Vernon Davis and Chris Thompson in terms of extra workload. Also Ryan Grant, who we expect to take a lot of Jamison Crowder's snaps in the slot. Definitely, we see Seattle kind of Sherman on the outside. We've known that middle of the field's a spot you can sometimes exploit with them, and especially so this week with Earl Thomas being ruled out with a hamstring injury. So, it's tough to say how good that Redskins offense can be in Seattle with, potentially only one offensive line starter, but we're definitely going to see a whole lot of Vernon Davis on the field against a potentially weakened secondary.
Yeah, so Vernon Davis is interesting, getting a lot of buzz in the industry this week just because of Niles Paul and Jordan Reed's injury. So he's probably going to be the every down tight end. But yeah, probably not going to be a great offense this week with all of these guys along the offensive line injured. Davis' price was intriguing, but maybe Tyler Burton makes it so we don't have to do that, maybe necessarily in cash games because I don't know, just the volatility of this offense without those guys along the line. What are your thoughts, Freeman? Is Davis still a guy that you want, or are you worried about the line?
I mean, Davis is still in play, but I really like that Seattle defense at home, going against an offensive line that's just broken, and Vernon Davis might have to stay in and block a little bit more than people think just because of the offensive line issues. So Davis is still in play, but I don't know. There's a lot to dislike about the situation too. Like Cam Chancellor is still there. He's still the guy in general who provides a lot of defense on tight ends. So there's still that possibility there.
Yeah. Probably some underappreciated risk. I know people are interested in some of these younger or cheaper receivers as well, but maybe a week to be on Seattle's defense more so. All right, let's go over to the Arizona Cardinals. We are getting word, Ian, that that Andre Ellington is going to be in. What are your thoughts on sort of the breakdown of this backfield? Obviously, this is a really good matchup against the 49ers, who over the last couple of years have been the worst team in the league to running back. So, these are very different plays. If Adrian Peterson is going to get good game script, we saw what he can do with that. If they're going to be behind, then probably he's not going to be a very good play. And Ellington and some of these other guys will be interesting, Fitzgerald, whoever. What are your thoughts on the Cardinals offense here?
Yeah, so we're expecting Ellington to be playing, but, we've still been hearing all week that Adrian Peterson is expected to be that guy with Carson Palmer out. We're still not expecting AP to really be their receiving back, so wouldn't be surprising at all to see Kerwin still get a rep or two. But, man, it's just a tough call. Like you said, this 49ers defense has been absolutely brutal against running backs. They are expected to have Reuben Foster back, who, fell to them in the draft a little bit, but he was widely considered a top 5 talent. So looking better from that front, but just really hard to trust the ceiling of this offense without Carson Palmer. We've seen Stanton in a few limited games the last few years, and they just really haven't posted the same type of scoring upside.
Yeah, anything you want to say here, Friedman?
Not much to add. I think it's an Adrian Peterson game, if there is ever such a thing anymore, with a guy who's like 32. Going against the 49ers defense that's allowed 58 touchdowns to running backs in the last 40 games. So, there's a lot to like about Adrian Peterson. I don't think there's much upside with Andre Ellington unless they get into negative game script.
Okay, let's hit on one more here. We did get word that Jeremy Hill is an inactive player today, so he will not be in the game. We would expect Joe Mixon to be the guy who's going to get really all the carries. Probably Gio's going to get some sprinkled of targets here. An interesting matchup here, Ian, against the Jaguars, who are perhaps one of the stronger funnel defenses in the league. They are very notably first in pass DVOA, last in run DVOA, have allowed the most yards, rushing yards to running backs, but we do get Darius here on this line. So maybe a bit of a tougher matchup. What are your thoughts on Mixon with the Hill news? Does it change anything for you? What are your thoughts on Darius in this defense?
Yeah, you mentioned the pass and rush defense discrepancies in DVOA. But, I mean, even with the number 32 defense and rush DVOA, the Jags still have the number 1 overall defense in DVOA. So just really one of the best all-around units in the league from top to bottom. And like you said, when you can add a player of Marcel Darius's caliber, basically as an overqualified run stopper, that's all you can ask for. I don't think Jeremy Hill being out really changes his spot a ton for Mixon. I mean, Hill was basically just getting the first series at the start of the game and going in the second half and a handful of carries along the way. So, decent matchup on paper, obviously, but we also got to keep in mind this Bengals offensive line has been the 3rd worst unit in the league in adjusted line yards per rush. So, Mixon's breakout game last week was basically more the result of a 70-yard catch than any success he had on the ground. So, it is a good matchup for a pretty terrible rushing offense is kind of my take on the backfield.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, if the rushing is where you want to attack Jacksonville, but you have to at least be semi-competent on your line to take advantage. Or Freeman, you sort of agree with that?
Yeah, I don't think it moves the needle much for Mixon in terms of Hill being out. I think that basically might give him a few more carries, which would maybe cancel out the effect of having Marcel Darius on the defensive line. So I think it's pretty much about the same. That said, it's a sneaky spot. I think you should have some exposure if you're playing multiple GPP lineups, some exposure to Joe Mixon, because regardless of how incompetent that offensive line has been, offenses have still attacked the Jags on the ground, and they've still done it with success. And Mixon is the guy. It seems like out of Mixon and Gio, Mixon will be the guy who gets the bulk of the carries.
Maybe another situation that we were talking about Seattle, just with this with this defense versus this offensive line. Maybe a situation where we want to target the Jaguars defense pretty heavily. At least that's my opinion. All right, let's get into some user questions here. One game that people are wanting to talk about quite a bit is this really high total Kansas City Dallas game. The total is at 52.5. Currently, Dallas is a 2.5-point favorite. We saw the line move a little bit with the news that Zeke is going to be in. Let's start on the Dallas side. Freeman, I'll kick to you first. We talked about a little bit in your breakdown articles and some of the videos that we did, what the Zeke news does to this offense. Dak and Dez are probably going to be pretty popular just because we would expect Dez to just maybe get a little more work, maybe some of the red zone carries, but Elliott might make the offense better. So is it sort of a net wash? Do you think it just improves the outlook of all of these guys? What are your thoughts on Dallas offense in general?
I think so. Dak, Dez, and Zeke, they're going to be some of the most popular players at their position. And the Zeke news, I don't think really hurts Dak or Dez all that much. I think it probably gives Dez a little more, maybe a little more opportunity to get a touchdown because the offense will be more efficient. But I think in general, it's just a great spot. Whenever news of Zeke came in, the line, the implied total for the team moved up. The game total moved up. The line swung back towards the Cowboys in terms of the spread. I think it's a pretty good spot for all three of those guys, especially Dez Bryant going against Kenneth Acker or whatever his name is, / non-Terrence Mitchell, who's the new Terrence Mitchell, just going to get destroyed on the other side opposite Marcus Peters.
Yeah, Ian, you talked about in your wide receiver cornerback column this week that wide receiver ones have actually done really, really well against the Chiefs, despite the Chiefs having a good cornerback, is because they refuse to move Peters from that left cornerback spot. So people will just put their wide receivers opposite him and eat. And I think it would expect Dez to do exactly that. Is that your thoughts?
Yeah, we've actually already seen Dez line up as the Cowboys left wide receiver or in the slot on, I think it's 68% of his snaps this season. So they shouldn't even really have to scheme all that much differently to avoid Peters. I will say that whereas, Terrence Mitchell, who was starting over Acker as of before last week, whereas he was just terrible and Acker really hasn't shown any signs of being better. Steven Nelson was the Chiefs' full-time starting slot corner before the season and replaced Phillip Gaines, who was terrible once Nelson got healthy. So Acker's definitely a guy we shouldn't be afraid of.
Good question that I saw on Twitter. How many people, Friedman, do you think forgot that there was daylight savings time and think that lock occurred just a couple minutes ago?
I don't know. The thing is, we're now in a technologically advanced world where right. iPhones and stuff like that automatically update. Yeah. So I think if people and most people are setting lineups on their phones, so I think it's probably less than 1% of people who are playing.
I guarantee there's someone on DraftKings.
There's someone there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's got to be. All right, let's flip this around. What are your thoughts, Ian, on the sort of offensive line, defensive line breakdown? Kareem Hunt obviously is the guy that was getting some buzz early in the week, rightfully so, because he was really the only high-price option that you could, we had Fournette. At the time, we had Gurley, but those were in some tough matchups. So Kareem Hunt was maybe a guy that we wanted to target. Obviously, with the Zeke news, people are going to be all over him. So what are your thoughts on Kareem as a pivot away from Zeke?
Yeah, Kareem's definitely in play, especially with Fournette gone. He's really, it's one of those last few backs that truly has that massive workload we can count on. I will say that Hunt really has struggled since his first 3 games of the season. I mean, he was looking like, the no doubt, rookie of the year, all-timer back, but he's kind of fallen back to earth and is even averaging over 4 yards per carry in the last 5 games. So still a decent matchup, but this Cowboys defense really hasn't been as bad as we're used to seeing when they have David Irving and Sean Lee healthy on the field. So I know there is the high Vegas total and everything, but might not be the smash spot that we would kind of grow accustomed to thinking against the Cowboys.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think people are going to treat this game a lot like they treated some of the high total games, like especially that like Houston Seattle game, where we said that that could be one that had like a shootout potential last week, and then we saw Cubs fan 33 Fantasy Lab subscriber give him a shout out, took down $1 million in the DK Million Maker for just completely stacking that entire game. So, Freeman, do you think people are going to do similar things to this one?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, a big difference is Lamar Miller was a lot cheaper than Kareem Hunt. And I think people were on Kareem Hunt as the running back they wanted in this game when Zeke was out. And then now that Zeke is back in, they've pivoted to Zeke. And so our ownership projection for Kareem Hunt has dropped. But it's not as if his capability has declined any with the news of Zeke coming in. So I think there's the possibility to get him at an ownership discount. And one thing about his struggles over the past month, he's faced 3 top 10 run DVOA defenses in the Texans, the Steelers, and the Broncos. So I think it would be natural for him to not underperform, but just not perform quite as well in those matchups. But this is a great spot for him going against a defense that I believe is 30th in rush DVOA right now, maybe 29th, but not good. The Cowboys aren't good in rush defense. So it is still a great spot for him, especially because he can contribute as a receiver.
Okay, let's get to a couple more questions before we get out of here. I think about 80% of our questions in chat right now have to do with Jack Doyle. So that's fun. So instead of just saying, do you like him? Let's phrase it in a way of, what are you expecting target-wise? We've seen the last 3 weeks, 11, 7, and 14. He's really just been like Jacoby Brissett's like safety blanket guy. He just checks down to so much. Houston may not have the best defense in the world right now. Ian, what are your thoughts on Doyle? Not a bad price here, actually.
Yeah, definitely not a bad price. And, we've seen Brissett kind of go to him over and over again this season. And he's, at this point, Doyle is definitely locked in above Moncrief and Aiken in that offense. But we can't forget about T.Y. Hilton. He's still that team's most explosive playmaker. Pagano spent all week basically talking about them needing to get him the ball more often. And he's coming off of matchups against the Jaguars and Bengals, who have, historically the last few years been 2 of the better teams at taking away wide receivers, especially the Jaguars this season. So, while Doyle's definitely that guy there, this Texans defense really banged up and doesn't have the same sort of ability outside the numbers I think the Colts have seen in recent weeks. So, we'll see if they can get T.Y. back on track in the dome.
Cool. All right, let's get to the last question. We'll go to the other side of this ball. All right, Freeman, we don't have Deshaun Watson. Instead, we have Tom Savage. He has never thrown a touchdown in the National Football League. That's not great, but there are still some talented guys in DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller going against not great secondary, not great defense of the Indianapolis Colts. And now we have them projected for 2 to 4% ownership on DraftKings. What are your thoughts on these guys? Are they still, they obviously are priced as if they have Deshaun Watson as their quarterback, which isn't ideal, but it also contributes to their lower ownership. What are your thoughts on them? Are they still intriguing GPP plays to you?
Yeah, obviously you can't touch them in cash, but I think they're all still intriguing for GPPs. Miller, potentially, no Deshaun Watson. So it looks like they might be interested in running the ball a little bit more so he could get some extra carries. But yeah, I'm still interested in all of them. Hopkins, Fuller, even Griffin a little bit, Miller, still interested. They're still big home favorites going against the defense that has allowed the most points to opposing teams. So still a good matchup, just not a great matchup like it was earlier in the week.
Yep. Ian, any last thoughts on this one?
I'm with Freeman there. I mean, it's just tough to pay up for those salaries without Deshaun Watson under center. So,
bonus last question: how many touchdowns is Amari Cooper going to have against this bad Miami secondary, and how much will Pete have of him?
Pete is going to own him 70% or something
on Fantasy, of course.
Yeah, and he's either going to have 0 touchdowns or 2+. There's no in between.
Fair enough. Yep, I think those are a pretty reasonable range of outcomes there. Cool. All right, we were going to end it there. Thank you guys for joining us. As always, really weird, interesting slate. So definitely good to be up on the injuries because the slate definitely changed a little bit this morning. So good to talk through that. Good luck this week, guys. Hope to see Fantasy Labs guys at the top of the leaderboard again. We had a good week last week, so hope to double down in week 9. Good luck. We'll talk to you guys next week.